Hello everyone, I'm Leah Toms from the marketing team and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. We're diving into the 2025 cryptography trends and what challenges and opportunities IT teams might see this year. For this, I have Jason Sirocco and Tim Callan here for you today. As always, we are recording the presentation and we'll share it with you afterwards, most likely tomorrow. And finally, if you have any questions during the presentation, send them our way. Please use the chat function and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. Jason and Tim, let's get started.
Thank you, Leah. And as it says here, Happy New Year. Happy New Year, Jason.
Happy New Year, Tim.
All right. So we you and I have talked about expectations for the upcoming year. We actually did a podcast episode on this. We've got this kind of organized, tried to organize what we had to say around them. And I think there are four trends for this year that we've got coming up that we want to talk about. First of all, what's going on with postquantum cryptography. Obviously, that's very important, and we'll give that the appropriate focus as something important that's coming on. Next, we'll hit the decline of legacy technology stacks. I'll explain what we mean when we get there. Decreasing maximum term of lifespans for certificates has been a big trend in particular, and TLS, which people care about a lot, is a big news item right now. And then we do think that there's generally a tightening up around the rules for public CAs, especially in the world of revocation, and we want to get into that. So with that, why don't we get into it? So post-quantum cryptography. Jason, maybe you can catch our readers up on, or our listeners up on where the move toward PQC stands right now.
Tim, 2024 was a huge year. We had NIST deliver to us not just choices of cryptographic standards for post-quantum, but also full standardization of at least 3 of those.
Yeah.
And so therefore, when I'm talking to people for the longest time, we're talking in a time span of, 2 to 3 years, a lot of what was said was, well, I'm waiting for NIST to drop its standards. And that happened. There will be more. There will be more because we need this diversity of post-quantum cryptographic algorithms. But where we sit right now is that we are no longer waiting for the base standards that are out there. They are now out there right now. What also happened at the very end of 2024, Tim, which was just huge, was that NIST released a draft. Basically, if you think about the legacy cryptographic algorithms, RSA and ECC, the deprecation of those was listed in the draft as being in the 2030 timeframe, which to me was huge because a lot of people thought that we would have to wait until some sort of a panic button event where the deprecation of those cryptographic standards would occur. And in fact, NIST didn't wait for that. The writing is on the wall right now for those standards.
Yeah, I think all these things are exactly right. Like, so the FIPS standards are out. So if you are very much a technologist and you control your entire ecosystem, you could actually develop to these standards today. And we have seen some of that has gone on, right? We've seen that from the likes of Google and Cloudflare, and I think Apple. For others that will be building on that, this will be a big year for that, right? And when we're looking forward to what's coming soon, we can imagine the set of downstream capabilities that come from those FIPS standards. And the obvious one is IETF. So you and I recently on our podcast published an interview with the person from IETF who leads the PQC effort there. And they would like to have standards for certificates from IETF this year. And so when you look at that, it's not a guarantee, but that's kind of the goal. And so when you look at that, this is a big year because then we have certificate standards, right? At that point, you can do a private CA, or if you're developing software for a private CA, you can go develop that software. And so this is going to be a big year for going from kind of this project that primarily is the purview of mathematicians and cryptographers into this global effort that is really owned now by software developers and even a few IT teams. And I think in 2027, we're going to see this move into an effort that is broadly owned by IT teams. And so, those are both, that's a big thing. And then, as you said, connected to that at the same time, we're looking at a 2030 target deprecation for RSA and ECC. That is not many years away. So we also should expect to see people this year in 2025 begin to build their action plans, not even begin to, build their action plans for how to migrate off of these standards. Remember, RSA and ECC are everywhere. So they're going to need to build their action plans for getting off these standards, and they're going to need to move to something that is, getting ready for the migration to PQC. The other thing I think that we are looking for to happen in 2025 is a real maturation of the PQC HSM market. So lots of companies use HSMs, and the HSMs they're using aren't really suitable to a PQC scenario. They're not, the keys there aren't PQC, right? The HSMs themselves are not supporting this. And the HSM manufacturers are very, very well aware of this. And we're predicting that in 2025, we're going to see widespread commercial availability of quantum safe HSMs. So you'll just be able to buy them and install them in your NOC the exact same way that you do with a traditional architecture HSM today. You agree, Jay?
Yes, Tim. And one thing it's not written here, and I think it's worth saying quickly is that, not all HSMs are going to be created equal. And I think this is a really good opportunity for all of you who consume HSMs to ask the hard questions of your HSM vendors, whether or not that if your HSM was touted as being backwards compatible to these newer cryptographic algorithms, find out whether or not that's completely true. Find out whether or not
Yeah.
even the upgrade cycle of
Yeah.
those HSMs is based on classic algorithms or not. I think that understanding your HSM today and its current capabilities will really help you to understand whether or not you need to do a full upgrade cycle on your HSMs. It's going to be
Yeah.
big work. It might even be tied into completely changing over to post-quantum certificate
Right.
authorities as well. So there's a lot to think about here.
That's one of the questions that comes up a lot is, am I literally going to have to scrap these and buy new ones? Or is there some kind of update I can do to the HSMs I have? And I'm not sure that there's 100% clarity on that point. I've heard people espousing both viewpoints. And I think that's something everybody who uses an HSM needs to get comfortable with their knowledge of their answers. Because if you're going to have to buy a new set of hardware this year to implement, and you didn't budget for it, then that's something you might want to be dealing with sooner rather than later.
You got it, Tim.
So we think that here's the third one here. I'm just going to read. Before the end of 2025, organizations will have access to standardized post-quantum cryptographic algorithms in private PKI instances. So this goes back to what we said about IETF, right? We have the FIPS standards right now. We are hopeful to have the IETF standards this year. And what that means is if you are running your own private PKI and you have sufficient technical capability, you're really able to move forward. And we mentioned a couple organizations, three organizations who we know have already done that. Now, we know these guys are kind of the best of the best from a technology development perspective. But there's, plenty of enterprises out there with robust technology development capabilities. And so if you are one of those organizations and you're in an ultra sensitive use case, right? You're a major financial institution, you're a major government, you're a defense contractor, right? You may be thinking about doing your own PQC with your own internal resources. And I think what I want to say about that is, yes, this is a viable thing that companies can actually do. It is also, it wouldn't be fair to describe it as non-trivial because it's much worse than that. It's a very heavy lift and it is fraught with peril. And if you are going to try to build your own, you got to really know what you're getting into. And if you get it wrong, the error cases are high because you can have things just not work, you can have an outage, or you can have insecure PKI and be vulnerable. And those are both real possibilities if you get your PKI wrong. So we think this is going to happen some in 2025. We think as tools and capabilities come online, we'll see more of this. And, some of it is a function of how soon do we get those standards from IETF? How soon can vendors, managed PKI vendors, provide suitable solutions? And again, I think we may be seeing those by Q4. I think we'll definitely be seeing those through 2026. So this is the year to be thinking about, what does a PQC PKI instance look for me? What are the vendors and the solution providers that'll help me get there? And what's my action plan to actually get there, with an eye that you may be running by the end of the year, or you may start running sometime in 2026. Right, Jay?
Yep, totally agree, Tim. That's the time frame. I don't think you're going to be escaping 2026 without something in place, and so therefore that makes this year, 2025, a really big year.
Yeah, and this is the year, right? You got to be doing that homework, right? This is the year to be figuring that out. And I mean, and they're not going to know the answer now, but it is good to start getting a sense from your appropriate vendors. Through all of this, a lot of this is be working on getting a sense from your vendors of what are their expectations for offering suitable products for you to use, assuming most of us aren't going to do our own core tech the way, let's say, Google does, right? So if that's the case, then who's going to get me to a suitable product and when can I expect those things to come about? What does migration to them look like? What kind of budget do I need? Those are the kinds of questions you should be asking. You definitely want to get started on this. So we've been espousing what we call this quant framework. And this is a good way to work through your transition. And so let's just walk through what each of these mean. Q, your quantum exposure inventory. So what do you have in terms of assets, processes, digital assets that are risky, right? What's the inventory you had? And then the U, if you put the QU together, what do you have and what does that translate to in terms of your risk, right? So the first two together are kind of create an asset inventory with some kind of risk measurement connected to it. And the risk you want to think about is, how bad is it if the secret gets stolen? How long does the secret last? And then how hard is it for me to do an upgrade here? And we've talked about this a lot. Some of these things, the upgrades will be very easy. They'll be done for you. Your desktop machines, that'll be handled by Microsoft and Apple for you. They'll just do it. Some of it might be very, very hard. Your own internal homegrown stuff, you're going to have to do all the work. And so when you look at these two things together, I've got to get an inventory of my assets, understand what my risk is, and then from there you want to have a prioritized plan and a real sensible action plan. That's the A in quant, right? What am I going to do? What do I think I'm going to implement and when? When do I think it's going to be done? What has to happen? Build your Gantt chart. Do the real work on that. And navigate implementation. Now we go and we actually start working on these things and putting them in place. And then track and manage, right? Not all of this will be exactly right the first time. Some will require adjustment. There will be bugs. There will be roadblocks. These things just happen in the real world. And the other thing to remember is that these last two, navigate, implementation, track and management, that might happen in phases. That might happen in time. You might have different things that are out of sync with each other because that's what you did in the first three steps. You determined what you had, determined your action plan, you determined your priorities. And then from there, you went through and started to implement. So this basic idea of quant, and we do have an asset that goes into a lot more on this that I'd recommend you come get from us. But this basic idea is a framework that enterprises can use to try to understand their action plan for becoming PQC ready. Want to add to that, Jay?
Yeah, I think it's important just to go all the way back to the beginning of this. I think where a lot of people are at right now, Tim, is they're wondering where do I start at all? And where to start is really in that queue, which is taking inventory of your cryptographic assets, taking inventory of your secrets that are being encrypted in both data at rest and especially data in transit. Those are the things you should be taking inventory of right now. That is your first step.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's if you haven't started already, and I hope you were doing this in 2024, but if you haven't started already, this very much is the time to get started on that. And we can't strongly enough recommend that you get going on that. All right. Shall we move on? Anything to add to PQC? This is going to be a big year. 2025 will be the year of standards really coming together, vendors doing a lot to clarify and get their products ready. And 2026, I think, is going to be really the year of implementation for enterprises, for users of PQC. So that's how I see that shaping up, essentially. All right, let's move ahead. The decline of legacy technology stacks. So one of the things that's connected to all of this is that we alluded to this a little in the previous slide. The idea that different sets of technology solutions inside your infrastructure will have different levels of effort required to become PQC compatible. So for instance, and the instance I used is the best one, which is, things like mobile phones and desktops, laptops, that work will be done for you. Those vendors will create PQC compatibility. They'll do what they need to do. They'll push it down to those devices. For current off-the-shelf supported popular software, most of that work will be done for you. You'll be given a patch. You'll be asked to deploy the patch, but someone else will be responsible for integrating PQC into, let's say, your server operating system. For SaaS applications, that work will be done for you. That SaaS vendor will have to figure it out themselves. But then there's a set of things where nobody's going to do this for you. This is the homegrown stuff. This is the stuff where your developers sat and made custom software that is unique for your business. And or worse than that, not your developers, developers you hired who don't work for you, made custom software for your business. And you and I think you agree with me, Jay, that this is where enterprises are going to find one of their biggest challenges with PQC, right?
Oh, there's no question. I think that as you're taking inventory, I think what you're all going to realize is something that you and I, Tim, have talked about for a long time, is the
Right.
ubiquity of these cryptographic algorithms is just
Oh yeah,
absolutely everywhere.
everywhere.
For those of you who are doing even very modern uh, application development in microservices architectures using things like Kubernetes, Docker, etc., keep in mind that RSA and ECC are all over those systems, especially with respect to container authentication using TLS certificates that might be using RSA or ECC. And there's just an unlimited number of these systems that are out there. It is utterly and completely ubiquitous, and that is what you're going to find in every enterprise. It's just everywhere, Tim.
Yeah, and so one of the things that Jason and I are predicting is that, well, one of the things we all know is there are lots of bits of technology that really, let's say, are older than they ought to be. That somewhere along the line something was implemented. It's either sitting on some kind of unsupported hardware or operating system or something like that, or it depends on unsupported software, or it was made by internal resources and the prioritization and the effort hasn't been made to keep it current. And we all know lots of companies have this, right? Somebody developed a system and that system's been running and we don't really maintain it and we don't think we can do a build. And if there is a bug in it, we don't really think we can fix the bug. And we kind of hope that that doesn't happen. And since it hasn't happened, we keep going with it. Or we're sitting on some old version of whatever it is, some software package, some operating system. We can't get current for some reason or another. And again, we're just looking the red lights on the box every day and we're considering ourselves lucky and we're getting on with our lives. And that's a risky way to live your life in general, but that is a way to live your life that is foundationally incompatible with a migration to a new cryptographic set of standards, right? Simply can't. And this is going to force, I think, be a forcing function for a lot of enterprises to reckon with these legacy stacks that they have kind of been putting off or ignoring. And so one of the things that we're predicting as a product of PQC, it's not directly about PQC, but as a product of PQC, we think that there will be a lot of requirement that's really hard to get around for organizations to think hard about these legacy applications, legacy hardware, legacy operating systems, etc., that they probably know in their heart they shouldn't be using. And they understand there's a lot of jeopardy and a lot of risk because I can't do an update. I can't really fix a bug. I'm not getting vulnerability scans. I'm not deploying patches. If there are 0 days, there's nothing I can do about them. And, you know, that maybe is some risk that enterprises have been living with. But once your cryptography is fundamentally untrustworthy, the amount of risk you're living with in all scenarios went up considerably. And so we are predicting that in 2025, this is the year, and we think that everybody who's listening to this should go away and ask yourselves, is this the year where I need to force a conversation about these legacy systems, these legacy stacks, and this technology we're living with, and whether or not we're prepared to continue to absorb that ongoing risk. And if not, the investments we need to make and the time we need to have to do something about it. And, you know, nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody wants to deal with this. But I think PQC is going to force a lot of us to deal with things that we've kind of been willfully ignoring.
Tim, I think there's a big upside to this, and this is probably going to be a future podcast episode that you and I can do. But I think there's an enormous amount of opportunity in innovation because the
Yeah,
way that we used to do things, 10, 15, even 5 years ago is really should be very different than the way we're going to be doing things by 2030. And this is the big opportunity to rethink how we
sure.
architect our systems.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, you want to talk about bright sides? There's a bunch of bright sides to this, right? Which is any deprecated tech that you're still using in your environment is fraught with other problems, right? It probably has unpatched security holes, oftentimes very significant ones. It is not in any way agile. It may be impossible to update. It may be that things like bugs and outages at best are very difficult to deal with, and at worst are actually impossible to deal with. And so there's always a huge amount of risk that is attached to you. Can't really make forward progress. You can't have a roadmap. You can't make improvements. So there's always risk and performance and capabilities gaps with these things. And so if we deal with them, if we root out and rip out the legacy equipment and software and replace it with something that's current and updatable, there's a fleet of other benefits that come with that, like better security, like better uptime, like faster performance, like the ability to have a development roadmap with new capabilities, like better compliance. So all of those things come, and those are great. Where in the past we would have had to be motivated by those on their own, now there's this additional factor. There's this additional weight on the one end of the scale. So we do think that this is a conversation that's starting in 2025 and is going on for several years, but it is a good year to be asking yourself, can I continue to live with this unsupported, non-upgradable legacy tech? All right, let's move away from PQC. What do you say, Jay?
Do it.
And let's talk about your and my favorite topic, decreasing certificate lifespan. So 2024, 23 and 24 saw a lot of progress in this regard. 2023 really saw Google throw down the gauntlet to say, we want TLS to be 90 days. And this generated a lot of conversation. And then in 2024, Apple picked up the baton and gave us a concrete phase down plan that would have the world at a maximum 47-day TLS by 2028. In another webinar and some of our podcasts, we've explained that number 47, which might seem a little odd, but it actually makes sense if you know how they constructed it. And these are now like very serious initiatives that while there's nothing official today, this really is what we're looking at. So let's quickly go down the step down, because I think this is an important thing to understand. So today the maximum term for a TLS certificate is 300, for a public TLS certificate, I should say, is 398 days. There's also something called DCV, domain control validation. The DCV reuse period for that, the how often you have to revalidate a domain, if you will, is also 398 days. And then organization validation, which is where we determine you're really the company you say you are, is 825 days. And as you see, all of these things are going to step down. So according to this proposal, in March 15, 2026, the maximum certificate term goes to 200 days, as does the DCV reuse period. A year later, it goes down to 100 days, and then a year after that, it goes to 47 days. And again, if we want to explain these numbers, 398 days essentially is 1 year plus a little bit of extra. And the extra is useful for a few reasons. If you have some kind of problem and your automated systems don't fire when they're supposed to, or if you want to renew early, the extra accounts for all of that. So all of these things have some extra, which helps you all that. 200 days is 6 months plus some extra. 100 days is 3 months plus some extra. And 47 days is 1 month plus some extra. So the way to think about it is that this is stepping down from a year to 6 months to 3 months to 1 month. And now the dates make sense. And so this is the dream. This is the vision that Apple has. And this is the specific, explicit, concrete plan that Apple has had a draft ballot that's been out for public feedback for several months for something that essentially Apple wants to take to ballot. And of course, if you're down to 1 month as opposed to 1 year, that means that the amount of certs you're swapping out are happening 12 times as often. Jay, do you want to add to that?
No, Tim, I think you've nailed it. There is a lot here, and you might be wondering why is the industry doing this to me? I can tell you though, Tim, that we have talked about this at length on our podcast about
Yeah.
the positive reasons, and we came up with 7 really positive reasons for why everybody should want shortened certificate lifespans. And I think that this plan that Apple has proposed is very rational and actually does a really good job of addressing people's concerns and the
Yeah.
ability to move forward with this. But the underlying the reasons for this, these numbers are not arbitrary that you see here. And the reasons to do the shortening of certificate lifespans is also not arbitrary. There are very good reasons for it.
Yeah, and you know that yeah, you said a couple things that are I think important. One is that we do have an explanation of the reasons for shortening certificate lifespans. It's a pretty recent episode of Root Causes, and when you're out of this webinar, it may be worth listening to. I think you and I might do a webinar just on that topic in the future because it's an interesting topic that people want to talk about. And yeah, the other thing I think well, that you said it well. You said it well. So we're going to move on to 47 days, right? This is very likely to happen. And as this occurs and we step down to this, I remember the point I wanted to make, which is the step down element is an important part of this too, right? So it's not just like there's going to be a sudden catastrophic event and we're going to go from 1 year to 1 month and everybody's got a deal. What Apple has built here is something that basically can move the industry a bit at a time, right? So when March 15, 2026 comes around, if you have systems that are not ready for doing this through automation, then you'll do them manually. You'll just have to do them every 6 months. But that will be motivational for us to get automated whatever isn't automated. Because after that, it's going to go down to 90 days. Now, at 90 days, could you still do a few things manually? Yeah, probably rather not. But if there are some laggards that are just hard and require a long period of time to get automation in place, there's a plan for that. And then a year after that, it goes down to monthly. And so this is supposed to give, I think, enterprises and technology vendors alike an opportunity to, I hate to say ease into it, but to kind of ease into it, right? To prioritize, deal with the easy and the hard use cases and the most urgent use cases first. And if there's some relatively small things, relatively few certs, that are more difficult to automate, and you have to kind of suck those up for a little while. At least it makes that more practical than it would be otherwise, right? And this is reflective, I think, of a desire on Apple's part to move and migrate the world to shorter certificate lifespans while also not breaking the internet, right? And they want to do both. They want to get people on shorter certs, but they want to do it without making everything stop working. They don't want to go back to pen and paper. And this is an attempt to accomplish both of those goals. So what do I do about it? What do I do about it, Tim? Well, we have a 5-step plan on this. And the first one is this webinar. It's awareness, right? It's knowing that it's happening. It's knowing that it's, I would say, an inevitability. This is something people want to debate, but I don't think there's any realistic idea that we're not getting down to something in the ballpark of a quarter or a month. And so there's an awareness and discovery component to this. That's very important right now. What do I have? What are my systems? What are my certificates? What's automatable? What's not? Right? Where do I have Acme support? Where do I not have Acme support? What is sitting inside of a certificate lifecycle manager? What is not? Where are my rogue certificates? Where are my rogue CAs? And getting all of that under control. And this is the first thing you should be doing, because you can't automate, you can't feel good about something if you don't know that something exists. And we don't want to learn the hard way when things start expiring because suddenly we can't get 1-year certs anymore. Then the second one, connected to that, your vendor technology inventory. This is what we were saying. What is automated? What supports Acme? What supports an API? Where can I put an agent on? Where can I use a CLM? And where can I not? So the vendor technology inventory is another important part. Where all my certs sit, what are they working on, and how do I work with those? Then you do an automation map, right? Turn around and say, okay, what's automatable, what's not? Your rollout plan, put automation in place everywhere you can, put as much of it as you can, implement it, QA it, make sure it's working right, double check it, get it all running smoothly. The stuff that isn't, build a plan to get onto some kind of software, or if it's homegrown, develop some software that is automation ready. And when all of that's done, you get to your step 5, which is crypto agility. And crypto agility is handy for a number of things, one of which is things like shortening certificate lifespans. Another one is things like deployment of postquantum cryptography certificates. Sorry, I said we were done talking about it, but I guess I was wrong, right? And so all of that crypto agility is just incredibly valuable for your organization. And this is the steps you need to go through to get to the point where you can feel like moving down to monthly certificate renewals on all of your public TLS certs is not going to break your systems. Jay, add to that.
I think that as you look at this checklist, there's so much else going on in your organization, but I would see this as it has to be tied into everything else that you are doing, and therefore I really think that one of the things that needs to be said is that as we are in demand of agility for certificates themselves, there are still a lot of you out there who are doing things manually. You're keeping track of certificates in spreadsheets, you're renewing them manually, and you possibly have not done a cryptographic asset inventory yet for post-quantum purposes. If you're in that boat and you're already underwater doing all of your other work, then I think that, again, what makes this 47-day checklist work right alongside what you saw with the quant model earlier is everything is about discovery at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's all about taking inventory of cryptographic assets. If you think it's two different jobs, it's actually the same job, and that's a fine point I think that needs to be made.
Yeah, and building on what you just said there, Jay, I also think discovery can be hard, right? There's a certain
Yeah.
number of things you probably know about because they're sitting in the spreadsheet, but there may be others. These spreadsheets might be spread out. There might be different individuals doing different things. Pulling all of that together into a single pane of glass view is extremely valuable. And tools can help with this. There are discovery tools and there are management console viewing tools, reporting tools. A good CL album package will provide both of these things. And tools are incredibly helpful, right? And having one unified viewpoint where the people who are responsible for certificates actually see the certificates and can do things to the certificates, which might seem elementary, but frequently doesn't happen, is insanely helpful and not to be overlooked as a critical part of your success strategy. All right, so the last prediction is I very much am of the belief that we are seeing a tightening up, a much needed tightening up of the public certificate market and the web PKI. And in particular, there has been a pain point around revocation of public certificates. So one of the things that happened in 2024 is it became starkly apparent, two things became starkly apparent. One of them was that there's lots and lots and lots of public CAs that have huge gaps in their performance against what's expected, both by common sense and by the rules for a public CA. And I mean lots. And there's a large number of CAs that have inadequate understanding of what they're supposed to be doing in the first place, or they don't prioritize it against other things like, very, very straightforward commercial desires. And perhaps they're under resourced, and perhaps they just don't think they have to be very serious about this, or perhaps they think that the rules don't really or shouldn't really apply to them. And we've seen this manifested in a lot of ways. And, I'll encourage you, if you're interested in this, to go back to the Root Causes podcast in 2024 and kind of review our Bugzilla Bloodbath series of episodes. But the biggest way that this was manifested is around failure to revoke certificates when they need to be revoked. So there are very clear rules around what CAs need to do when they misissue certificates. And there's revocation that needs to happen in certain timelines. And some of them are 24-hour revocations and some of them are 120-hour revocations, but this needs to occur. And this is unambiguous. And we've seen a large number of CAs, including some very big ones, try to debate and argue and weasel their way out of these rules and pretend that these rules don't apply, or pretend that these rules don't apply to them. And it has, again, it has really starkly shown both a set of CAs who aren't taking this seriously enough, who aren't investing their resources enough, or, dare I say it, a set of CA with integrity problems, where they know what's expected to them, but they just aren't going to do it anyway. And so one of the consequences I think we're going to see out of this is a tightening up of the rules across the board with the CAB forum. And we've seen that already. And in particular, I think we're going to see something put in place that's going to assess penalties on both CAs that fail to get their revocations done on time and the subscribers who enable that by essentially refusing to cycle out certs when revocations are required. And the exact form that this takes is not clear. There have been several proposals. There's been a proposal that CAs that fail to get revocations done on time are going to have to start doing a certain number of random revocations every year to prove that they're able to do it. And if you're a subscriber to that CA, you're just taking your chances that you might get randomly revoked. There's proposals that the maximum term of CAs that can't get their revocations done will be accelerated compared to what everybody else has. There's proposals about reporting requirements and other things that in general stand to make my life much harder for both subscribers and CAs where revocation isn't done on time. And this has had a lot of pressure, there's a lot of attention on it, and I very much believe we're going to see something actually come together in 2025. Do you want to add to that, Jay?
No, I think Tim, geez, you got to almost listen back to some of our podcasts on
Yeah,
the Bugzilla bloodbath, etc. I think that there's so much information here, and the reasons why are what's really important. I think for the average consumer of SSL certificates, the thing that the industry is upset with is just the lack of a certificate agility and the ability to have
yeah,
all use cases state that
yeah,
you've got to be able to revoke and replace your certificate. So if you see, this the entire section we had today on PQC, the entire section we talked about shortened certificate lifespans, the thematic, the thing that is very similar right across all these things is that your ability to swap out your certificates using certificate lifecycle management
yeah.
is really paramount here.
And that's absolutely true, Jay. And I'm glad you brought that up because that's a great point, which is at the end of the day, certificate agility, which is the description of what you need to be able to, always have a command of all of your certificates and know where they are and be able to change any and all of them at any time whenever you need to. Lack of certificate agility brings on all of these other problems. If you have certificate agility, the move to PQC isn't going to be a big deal. If you have certificate agility, the move to 47-day certs isn't going to be a big deal. If you have certificate agility, the revocation rules, stricter revocation rules will not have any impact on you. All of these things will be fine if you have certificate agility. It's organizations that lack certificate agility that have these problems. So if you're going to aspire to one thing, aspire to full certificate agility. And if you get that, then all of these other problems are just vastly mitigated or eliminated
Yeah,
entirely.
that's right,
All
Tim.
right. So you and I have referenced a lot of times on this podcast or on this webinar, excuse me, there I am, have referenced a lot of times on this webinar the Root Causes podcast. And so everything you saw here today has been discussed in much greater detail over multiple episodes on the Root Causes podcast. Jason and I do this podcast. We release most weeks we release 2 episodes. We have more than 450 episodes published, and we dive deep into all kinds of things involving digital identity, digital certificates, encryption, PKI, etc. And we would strongly encourage you to come join us. You can hear us, whatever pod gathering system you use, you can hear us and you can subscribe, and we would love to have you very much. And with that, I think we're ready for questions.
Great. A first question came in. Can we already buy post-quantum certificates?
Oh, God, no. So a couple things on that. One is let's differentiate between private and public certificates. So for private CA, you're going to need to have your system set up. In principle, like I said, if you're if you have the technical chops, you could do your own private PQC today, but we don't recommend it for any but the very most sophisticated developers of technology. This is a very sophisticated thing. For most of us, what we should be doing is using things that are provided to us by specialized tech vendors. And for us, we're going to have to wait, right? Those tech vendors aren't ready. They don't have the standards, and it's going to take some time. For public, it's even worse because until it is allowed by the rules, I couldn't give you a PQC certificate today, right? As a public CA, if we issued a PQC certificate right now, we'd have to turn around and revoke it if it's on a public route because it would be non-compliant. we have to get to the point where there's actually rules. So we need to get guidelines out of IETF. Those guidelines then have to get handed over to the downstream organizations, which in this case is in parallel next to each other, CA Browser Forum and Etsy. And CAB and Etsy both need to make their own set of rules coming out of that. And only then can a public CA or a TSP actually issue you a certificate. And so that's I believe you'll be able to get certificates on public routes in 2026. 2025 is the year to prep for that. 2026 is the year to be deploying those certs.
Great. A second question is, do we know when the CAP Forum will vote on the implementation of the timelines?
That's a good one. I think that is ready to go to vote, and it will go soon. The first version of this was put up long ago. I'm saying like September, maybe early October. So there's been a lot of time to discuss this. Apple actually made an adjusted repo based on some of the feedback. That adjusted repo has been sitting up for months. And like there's been a lot of time to discuss. It is time for a vote. It will be Apple who brings this to vote, and they're going to do it on their timing. My prediction is that this will be in vote not more than a month from now, and we'll have a result by the end of February. That's my prediction.
Great.
We'll see if I'm right.
Another question around the shorter certificate lifespans is 10 days for DCV. Why is it so short? And then also, does Sectigo have automation for this?
Oh yeah, DCV. DCV is very important, right? DCV is how you connect control of a domain to ownership of a certificate, and it's extremely important. And in the absence of proper DCV, a giant army of attacks are enabled. So you need your DCV to be good. And one of the things that the industry has been cognizant of for quite a few years is the potential for a gap between legitimate certificate control or legitimate domain control and legitimate, properly issued certificate ownership. So today, if we want to do the math together on this, the DCV reuse period is 398 days, and the maximum certificate term is 398 days. So what this means is I could buy a certificate today, get DCV'd from a certain CA, get DCV'd, sell or give up control of that domain name tomorrow. And not only I can have a cert that lasted for up to 397 days, but I could come back 397 days later, buy a new 398-day cert from the same CA, have that cert issued to me and own that for 398 days. And I could literally have a legitimately issued cert from a legitimate compliant public CA that was following all the rules for a domain that I had not owned for more than 2 years. And it used to be worse. Back in the days of 3-year certs, it was worse. And the browsers are saying, no, enough, we can't have it. So when you look at the step down, right, we didn't really focus on the DCV and the OV very much, but when you look at the step down, not only when you bring the certificate term down, but also when you bring the DCV reuse period down. Now in that nightmare scenario, the maximum amount of time you can have that disconnection is 57 days, which is a horse of a different color from 26 months. And that's really the point. Now, to do that, right, what does that mean for us? Well, just like we talked about automation of certificates, automation of renewal, automation of deployment, automation of DCV is a very valuable thing. And in this new world order, as the DCV reuse period goes down and down and down and down, you as an enterprise want to be thinking about solutions that will allow your DCV to be automated. If you implement Acme, you can do it through Acme. If you have a managed DNS service, you can do it through there. But you got to think about DCV automation methods, because that also eliminates some of your risk of outage, right? If DCV can't be done in a timely fashion and you need to get a cert, you can't get that cert won't be issued. And if you don't have the cert where you need it, that's where you have delays or outages or things along those lines. So getting that automated reduces the risk for error, it reduces the amount of manual work that people have to do, and it reduces the risk for things like outages or delays. So DCV automation is also a very valid option as well. Is that something you can do through Sectigo? Yes. And especially we recommend Acme. That's the best way to do it. It's a very popular protocol. It's very widely used. And I think vendors who don't support Acme are going to find that they're in a vast commercial disadvantage if they don't get on the ball. So I think you're going to see more and more of that. And with widespread Acme support, with support of, Acme-based DCV and popular applications like CertBot, there's every reason to go that route, and that's something that we strongly recommend you look into.
Thanks, Tim. I think we have time for one more. The reasons for dropping certificate lifespans sounds well considered, but what about those overworked folks who actually do the work managing several certificates?
Jason, what about those overworked folks who actually do the work?
The overworked folks who actually do the work, what I would say to you is I can read your mind right from where I'm sitting.
Yeah.
And one of the things I know you guys think a lot about is I don't want to work myself out of a job by automating. And that is the worst way of considering all of this. You
Oh,
really,
yeah.
for the purposes of your CV,
It's the
for the
opposite.
purposes of
You're
your
going to
future,
jeopardize your job by not automating.
I know the culture. You love sitting at that command line and typing everything out manually, and it gives you a sense of control. And instead of embracing automation in every single form, you're basically saying to yourself, if I automate, then I don't get to sit here at my comfy command line. The truth is, you will always have that comfy command line, and automating away things that you really shouldn't be doing should be your priority in 2025. It should be your absolute priority, because trust me, with the advent of agentic AI and all the other hyper automation projects and initiatives that are going on right now, your bosses will end up deciding for you about how to automate. Please start automating out anything with regards to your any of your cryptographic assets, and especially certificates, for all the reasons you've heard about in this webinar today.
Yeah.
Great. I think that covered all the questions, and we are pretty much up to the hour as well. Thank you everyone for your time, and thanks Jason and Tim. If you've got any more questions, do get in touch with the Sectigo team directly. But for now, thank you and have a good rest of your day.